My name is Maren Ellis. I am 28 years old. And the thing that destroyed my life for 3 years was not an arrest. Not some reckless mistake I made when I was young, and not a single criminal record with my name on it. What destroyed me was the fact that my own parents called every place I applied for work and told them I had a criminal past. I did not. I had never been handcuffed, never stepped into a police station as a criminal, never done anything that deserved a label like that. By the time I turned 27, I was already living in a shelter, washing my hair in a gas station sink, stretching every meal, and watching one job after another disappear because of a lie repeated so many times that people started believing it was true. If you have ever had a moment when the people who were supposed to protect you were the very ones pushing you down the hardest, stay with me for a little while. Because every single week my father, Victor Ellis, sent me the same text message. Come home, apologize, then I'll consider it. And then one Tuesday morning, when I had almost nothing left to lose, a woman knocked on the shelter door, looked me straight in the eye and said, "Your grandmother asked me to find you." A few weeks after my 25th birthday, one morning began exactly like every other morning in that house. I woke up 15 minutes before my mother to turn on the stove, heat the water, slice the bread, then stand by the window and look at the thin layer of fog still hanging over the front lawn. In a small town called Harlem, Ohio, people liked things that looked peaceful from the outside. A clean porch, a car parked neatly in the driveway, a family arriving at church on time. My family had all of that. My father, Victor Ellis, was the kind of man who could walk into a room and make people move out of his way without ever raising his voice. A look from him, that flat, steady tone of his, and the whole room would go quiet. My mother, Elaine, seemed softer on the surface. She knew when to smile, how to ask the neighbors about their lives, how to bring a pot of stew to a sick family in the winter. If you had only met them out in public, I probably would have thought they were good people too. The only problem was, in my house, kindness always came with conditions. I cannot even remember the first time I realized that. Maybe I was 14, working part-time at the diner on Route 30, when my mother told me to hand over my whole paycheck so she could keep it safe for me. "You're still too young to manage money properly," she said, in that soft voice that made everything sound reasonable. I believed her. Then came all the other things I wanted for myself. To go more than 10 miles away. To stay at the library a little longer. To remain after school and work on scholarship applications. Every time I wanted something even slightly bigger for myself, my father had a way of making it sound foolish. "You really think those schools are sitting around waiting for you?" he asked me once, without looking up from his newspaper. I was standing by the dining table, my folder still in my hands. "I just want to try." "Try what?" He turned a page, his voice so calm it was chilling. "People leave home for school when there's nothing for them here. You've got a roof over your head, food on the table, a family. So what exactly is missing?" That is the hardest part to explain to people who have never lived in a house like that. There were no smashed dishes, no screaming matches loud enough for the neighbors to hear. It was just that, little by little, the smallest decisions in my life stopped belonging to me before I even noticed. I got used to asking permission before I ever stopped to ask myself whether I truly wanted something. I got used to living like a very polite guest inside my own life. And then one morning, as I stood in the kitchen scrubbing the same black cast-iron pan we had used for years, warm water running over my fingers, the smell of soap and old grease mixing in the air, a thought came over me so clearly that I stopped moving. I looked at my own hands. I looked at the dull gray morning reflected in the pan. And for the first time in my life I understood that if I did not leave right then, at 40 years old, I would still be standing in that exact same spot, doing those exact same things, still waiting for someone else to give me permission to live. The thought did not hit me like lightning. It came slowly, cold and stubborn, like rainwater soaking through an old roof. I did not drop the pan right then. I still rinsed it under the faucet. I still set it on the rack like I always did. But inside my mind some door had opened. And once it did, I could not pretend I had not seen what was on the other side. The next morning, I told my mother I needed to return some books to the library. She only nodded and told me to be back before noon, as if I were still 15 years old checking out homework books. I drove the old car out of town with both hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The Harlem Public Library sat tucked behind City Hall, small, quiet, always smelling faintly of old paper and floor cleaner. I walked straight to the computers in the back where the keyboards had been worn smooth by too many hands. I created a new email address. Just a name on a screen. A password I made up myself. An inbox no one else knew existed. It was such a small thing it almost felt ridiculous, but when I clicked confirm, my heart still started pounding. The feeling was so unfamiliar I had to sit still for a few seconds. It was not exactly happiness. It felt more like the first time you step outside in winter without a warm enough coat on. Cold, shaking, but strangely awake. I opened the local job listings and found an opening for a full-time sales associate at a hardware store in Millfield. 9 to 5. Benefits after 90 days. I read the job description over and over, far longer than I needed to, as if staring at it a little longer might make it feel more solid. Then I filled out the application with 2 careful fingers, line by line, and hit send before I could change my mind. 2 days later, a reply landed in the new inbox. They wanted to interview me Thursday at 10 in the morning. I read that email 3 times. Then I printed a copy at the library, folded it in half, and slipped it into my bag like it was something fragile. All the way home, I kept thinking about tiny things. A desk with my name on it. A time card. A paycheck going into an account I could actually see for myself. I did not dare think too far ahead. I only let myself think about a door cracked slightly open. That evening, dinner was quieter than usual. My father sat at the head of the table, his newspaper folded neatly beside his plate. My mother stood at the sink, wiping the same already clean glass over and over. No one asked where I had gone. No one said anything unusual, but something in the air made my shoulders go tight. I looked up just in time to catch my father glancing at me once, very quickly, before lowering his eyes and cutting into the meat on his plate. Thursday morning, I drove to Millfield 20 minutes early. The store lights were already on, and the smell of wood, metal, and sawdust drifted together the moment the door opened. The manager, Robert Hayes, shook my hand, invited me to sit down, and laid my application on the desk in front of him. His smile disappeared so fast I still noticed it had been there. He took off his glasses, rubbed the bridge of his nose, and asked, carefully, "Maren, is there anything in your past you need to tell me before we begin?" I blinked. "I'm sorry. What do you mean?" He hesitated for half a beat, long enough for the whole room to seem to sag. "Someone called here yesterday. They said you had been involved in a serious theft accusation." I looked at Robert Hayes. Then I looked back at the application between us, as if staring at it long enough might somehow change the meaning of what he had just said. But it did not. The meaning stayed there, cold and blunt, like something heavy that had just been dropped straight into my chest. "I have never stolen a single thing in my life," I said. My voice sounded smaller than I wanted it to. "You must have me confused with somebody else." "I hope I do," he said. And that was the sentence that made my heart sink. Because he did not say it like an accuser. He said it like a man who had been forced to doubt me. I left the store so numb I could barely feel anything at all. On the drive home, the wooden fences, gas stations, and familiar road signs between Millfield and Harlem passed in front of me like I was sitting in somebody else's car. I did not cry. I could not yet. Something inside me was still trying to fit together the first few pieces of a picture I did not want to believe was real. But over the next few weeks, that picture kept finishing itself. I applied at a grocery store in Ridgeway. They called me in. 2 days later, they said the position had been filled. I applied at a warehouse on the county line. The hiring manager said my application looked good, then never called back. I applied at a diner in Cooperton that needed someone for the morning shift. This time, I tried not to hope too much. I walked in as calm as I could, ordered a cheap cup of coffee before the interview, just so I would have something to hold. The owner was Nancy Doyle, a woman in her 50s with faded dyed blonde hair and eyes too sharp to bother pretending to be polite when she did not feel like it. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel and looked at me across the counter. "You're Maren?" Yes. She nodded and pulled out a chair to sit across from me instead of bringing me into the office like the others had. That was the moment I knew this conversation would not be like the others. Nancy lowered her voice. I'm just gonna be honest with you. Somebody called about you. I set my coffee cup down so slowly it barely made a sound. A woman? She watched me for another second, then nodded. Said she was a neighbor. Said you had a history of theft and fraud. Said I should be careful. I do not remember how I left the diner. I only remember that by the time I got home, my mother was in the kitchen folding dish towels with neat, precise movements, as if there were nothing in the world more offensive than a towel folded crooked. My father was sitting on the porch, just like always. The house was still intact, still spotless, still orderly. I was the only one who could not look at it with the same eyes anymore. That night, I waited until the last footsteps in the hallway disappeared. I waited for my parents' bedroom door to shut. I waited for the whole house to sink into the kind of silence I had once mistaken for peace. Then I walked barefoot into my mother's sewing room, opened the familiar drawer in her desk and touched a small blue notebook tucked beneath several neatly folded pieces of fabric. I opened it under the faint nightlight spilling in from the hallway, and within seconds I no longer felt steady on my feet. The names of the places I had applied to were listed in a neat vertical column, clean and orderly and terrifyingly familiar. Millfield Hardware, Ridgeway Fresh Mart, County Line Logistics, Cooperton Diner. Beside each one was a small red checkmark, careful and exact, in my mother's handwriting. No scribbles, no hesitation. Just a list she had been tracking with care, as if my future were nothing more than another household chore to be managed one item at a time. I did not cry then. I just stood there, the notebook in my hand, listening to my own heartbeat pounding so hard it felt like the whole house could hear it. Some truths do not come like a blade. They come like ice water poured straight into your chest, slower, numb at first, but they stay with you much longer. The next morning, I set the blue notebook in the middle of the breakfast table. My mother was pouring coffee. My father was buttering toast. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 100 mornings before, and that alone nearly made me laugh. A respectable family, a peaceful kitchen, a betrayal sitting right there in the middle of the table. My mother looked down at the notebook, and the color left her face so quickly I knew I had not imagined any of it. Explain this, I said. She set the coffee pot down a little too hard. Some of the coffee spilled across the table. You went through my things? I looked at her. You called them. Every place I applied. Tears came to her so fast it was as if she had already prepared them. I did it because I love you. I heard that sentence, and for the first time in my life, it did not sound like love anymore. It sounded like a rope around somebody's throat being called protection from falling. My father stayed seated, terrifyingly calm. He took a bite of toast, chewed, and only then spoke. It's dangerous out there, Maren. You have no idea what you're doing. I'm just trying to get a job. You're trying to leave home, he corrected, his voice level. That's very different. I turned back to my mother. You told people I was a thief. I told them what they needed to hear to be careful. About your own daughter? She crossed her arms over her chest like she was the one being hurt in that kitchen. You're too naive to understand what the world can do to a girl living alone. I laughed, but the sound came out so dry that even I barely recognized it. You are destroying my life. If someone you loved has ever hurt you and still demanded that you call it love, then maybe you understand how I felt in that moment. My father set his knife down. Your life is still here, in this house. I looked at him. What if I leave? He lifted his eyes and looked straight at me for the first time that morning. There was no anger in that look. That would have been easier. What I saw instead was certainty. If you walk out that door, he said, you'll leave with nothing. I did not answer him right away. Some threats are so large that if you touch them while they are still hot, they burn straight through you. I just stood there looking at him, then at my mother, who had turned her face away, as if she could not bear the scene, even though she had helped build it. That night, I packed a few changes of clothes into a backpack, slipped in my toothbrush, my phone charger, and a photo of my grandmother, Maren Ellis, into the front pocket, and stepped onto the porch into the sharp cold of late fall. I checked my bank account under the yellow porch light. The balance was 0. I stared at the screen so long it went dark on its own. Every paycheck from the diner, every tip I had saved, every birthday bill Grandma Evelyn had quietly tucked into an envelope for me each year, all of it was gone. My mother's name had been on the account since I was too young to understand what joint ownership even meant. She had emptied it cleanly, the way you wipe off a table. I knocked on the door again. When my mother opened it, I said very slowly, "I need my birth certificate and my social security card." She did not answer. My father stood behind her with one hand on the screen door. "Those papers belong to this household," he said. "No, they belong to me. When you learn how to behave, then we'll talk." The door shut right in front of me. Not hard, not loud, just final. And it was that finality that made me feel cold all the way down to the bone. I left home at almost 10 o'clock that night with $12 in my back pocket, a phone running low on battery, no identification, and nowhere to go. I walked to the main road and sat down on the curb outside the gas station on Route 30. The pale fluorescent lights poured over my shoulders. A large truck pulled in, then drove away. The cashier behind the glass looked at me once, then looked away. I did not blame her. In small towns, people learn early not to get tangled in other people's trouble. I slept in the gas station bathroom that first night, half awake, leaning against the wall, clutching my backpack to my chest as if loosening my grip even a little would cost me the last piece of myself I still had. The next morning, that same cashier handed me a paper cup of coffee and wrote the address of a shelter on the back of the receipt. Harlan Community Shelter was an old warehouse that had been renovated, with 20 metal beds, a small kitchen, and the constant smell of bleach hanging in the air. Patricia Sloan ran the place. She wore reading glasses on a thin chain, kept her hair short, and had the kind of calm voice that made people panic less after only a sentence or two. "Bed 14, she said, handing me a towel and a set of clean sheets. "No one here is going to make you explain your whole life on the first day." I slept in bed 14. During the day I washed dishes, swept the floor, folded towels, and organized the storage room in exchange for an extra serving of food. I applied for replacement documents. I started applying for jobs farther away, in towns I thought my parents would not even remember existed. But then a restaurant in Granton canceled an interview after receiving an email with an attachment designed to look official, almost like a police report. And a few weeks later, Patricia called me into her office and told me somebody claiming to be a social worker had called and said I had a history of violence. I sat there listening to her, and I realized my parents were not only trying to drag me back, they wanted to break every path I could possibly use to keep living without them. And in that exact moment, the fear inside me changed shape. It was not trembling anymore. It became cold, clear, precise. That coldness stayed with me for days after that. It did not make me strong overnight, it just made me less naive. I began keeping everything. My father's texts, appointment slips, the names of every place I applied, the dates and times of every canceled call. I did not know yet what I was going to do with any of it. I only knew that something in me had stopped begging to be understood, and had started learning how to watch. It was Patricia who told me about the town council meeting. She was standing at the end of the row of beds one afternoon, holding her usual clipboard. "Your father signed up to speak tonight," she said, her voice low and even. "I thought you should know." I looked up at her. "What is he going to say?" Patricia was quiet for a beat, probably his version. I understood exactly what that meant. In a place like Harlem, people do not need the whole truth. They just need a story emotional enough to repeat while buying milk, standing at the post office, or sitting in church on Sunday morning. And my father had always known how to tell the version that made him look best. That evening, I wore a borrowed coat from the shelter and sat in the last row of the community hall. Folding chairs were lined up in rows, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead so harshly they hurt my eyes, and every now and then the microphone at the podium let out a thin, shrill squeal. Everything about the room looked so ordinary it almost felt harmless. Then my father stepped up to speak. Victor Ellis was wearing the blue shirt he saved for funerals. bank appointments, and any occasion when he wanted to look like a decent man doing his best. He placed both hands on the podium, lowered his head slightly, and began speaking in a voice just deep enough to sound controlled. "I'm here as a father," he said. "My daughter left home, fell in with the wrong crowd, and is now living in a shelter. My family has tried to bring her back, but she refuses." The moment I heard him call me my daughter like that, my spine went cold. In the front row, my mother sat perfectly upright with a tissue already in her hand. Her tears came at exactly the right moment, graceful and measured, as if she had practiced them in a mirror. The woman beside her leaned over and took her hand. A man on the other side shook his head and sighed. I could feel the whole room tipping toward them, not through logic, but through that old small-town instinct. The person who cries better usually gets believed first. I had not been invited to speak. No one turned around and asked whether I had anything to say. I just sat there, back straight, hands clenched together beneath my coat, listening to my father turn me into a tragedy designed to make people feel sorry for him. After that night, the air around me changed. People at the grocery store glanced at me and then looked away. An older volunteer pulled me aside after lunch one day and said gently, "Maybe you should just go home. Parents always love their children." I looked at her and wanted to say so many things that, in the end, I could not say anything at all. Because by then I understood something brutal. When the people hurting you know how to cry in public, the victim is the one who usually looks ungrateful. In the days that followed, Harlem stopped feeling like a town. It felt like a soft net strung together out of glances, whispers, and sympathy, aimed in all the wrong directions. And inside that suffocating feeling, I suddenly remembered my grandmother Evelyn's voice, slow and steady, on some long-ago afternoon out on the porch. "If things ever get truly bad, someone will come find you." I had kept that business card in my coat pocket for days. Every time I changed clothes, I moved it into another pocket, like I was afraid of losing it. And yet I still was not fully ready to use it. The name Sandra Hale, printed in black on ivory cardstock, had started to wear at the corners because I had rubbed my thumb over it so many times. Some moments, I told myself it was probably just another dead end. Another door that would open only to lead into an empty room. But then at night, lying in bed 14, hearing someone cough down at the other end of the room and the old heater knocking inside the walls, I would think again of Grandma Evelyn's voice. Calm, slow, certain. As if she had always known there would come a day when I would need to remember every single word she had said. The next morning I called. The woman who answered had a low, composed voice. Not warm, not cold, just steady. When I introduced myself, she went silent for exactly one beat, then asked, "You're at the shelter, aren't you?" I sat up straighter on the edge of the bed. "Yes. I'll be there tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. Don't go anywhere." Sandra Hale arrived exactly on time, carrying an old brown leather briefcase, the kind that looked like it had survived a lot of years without softening. Patricia led her into the women's sleeping area and quietly closed the door behind her. I sat on the edge of my bed with my hands clasped tightly together. Sandra set the briefcase down on the gray blanket between us and turned it toward me. Along the darkened leather, near one edge, there was a line written by hand in slightly faded black ink. "For Maren. When she is ready." I knew that handwriting instantly. I had seen it on birthday cards, on labels attached to jars of jam she sent every summer, on the little notes she tucked into gardening books. My throat tightened so badly it took me several seconds before I could breathe normally again. Sandra did not speak right away. She waited for me to touch the briefcase first, as if she understood that some truths cannot be rushed. When I finally looked up at her, she began. "Your grandmother Evelyn Ellis brought me in years ago." "Years ago?" she nodded. "She told me there was a very real chance her son would go too far one day. And if that happened, I was to watch, collect everything, and find you when the time came." I looked at her, then back down at the briefcase. The whole room suddenly felt unnaturally quiet. Even the footsteps out in the hallway seemed far away. Sandra unlocked it. The first thing she took out was a cream-colored envelope with my name written on the front in my grandmother's own hand. My fingers shook when I took it. The paper inside had yellowed slightly with age. but the writing was still clear. She wrote that, if I was reading the letter, then things had gone farther than she had ever hoped they would. She said she was sorry she had not been able to stop Victor while she was alive. She wrote that some forms of control look like care from the outside, but the people living inside them know it is a cage. And then she wrote one line that made my vision blur with tears. Love that is real does not trap you and call it safety. It leaves you a way out, in case one day you need to run. I folded the letter back up very slowly. Only then did Sandra place a thick file in front of me, carefully divided with tabs. Inside were recordings of phone calls, date and time logs, printed emails, photographs taken through my kitchen window, including pictures of the blue notebook with my mother's red check marks. 37 times Elaine called to sabotage my employment. Anonymous emails with fake attachments made to look like police reports. Piece by piece, everything was there, clean and cold, as if all that time someone had been standing quietly at the edge of my life, documenting every single thing I had never been able to prove on my own. Then Sandra opened the deeper section of the briefcase and took out a heavier legal envelope, tied shut neatly with string. There's this too, she said softly. Your grandmother sold the farm years ago. She never spent that money. She created a private trust and named you the sole beneficiary. She left very clear instructions. Victor was never to know, never to touch it, never to be involved in any way. I did not open the envelope right away. I just looked at it lying there on the blanket, heavier than paper should have felt. My whole life I had only known love as something tied to conditions, control, punishment, and emotional debt. So in that moment, the thing that overwhelmed me most was not the money, and it was not even the evidence. It was the feeling of being loved, for the first time, by someone who did not ask me to make myself smaller, to fit inside their fear. I sat with that envelope in my lap the whole drive as Sandra took me to Millfield the next morning. The October sky was a dull gray, and the fields on either side of the road stretched out in silence, as if this whole part of the world had grown used to keeping unspeakable things hidden. I laid my hand on the edge of the envelope, then pulled it back. After so many months of living as if everything could be snatched away at any second, I barely knew what to do with something that had been protected intact just for me. Martin Cole's office was on the second floor of an old brick building above a small office supply store. The staircase was narrow, the wooden railing polished smooth with age, and the hallway smelled faintly of old paper and stale coffee. Martin Cole stood when I walked in. He was thin, neatly silver-haired, wearing rimless glasses, the kind of man who made a room feel calmer simply by lowering his voice. "You have Evelyn's eyes," he said after checking my paperwork long enough to confirm everything was valid. I did not know how to answer that, so I only nodded. Some kind words, when they come at the right time, hurt more than an insult ever could. The identity verification was orderly, formal, almost unfamiliar to me. I signed the papers to access the trust with my own name, and for the first time in months, nobody pulled the page away from me. Nobody told me to slow down, asked if I was sure I understood what I was doing. When the paperwork was done, Martin set down his pen and said, "Your grandmother left a private note for this situation. She wrote that you might need a lawyer before you ever need the money." Then he slid another business card across the desk to me. The name on it was Rachel Turner. Rachel's office was not large, but it was bright. The glass door overlooked the back parking lot, and 3 neat stacks of files sat on her desk with nothing extra around them. Rachel looked to be in her early 40s, wore a gray blazer, and had the kind of calm voice that made me sit a little straighter without meaning to. She did not say anything sympathetic. She did not ask if I was okay in that social way people ask when they do not really want the honest answer. She simply opened the file Sandra had brought, read it from beginning to end, marked several pages with yellow sticky notes, then looked up at me. "They told employers you had a criminal record?" "Yes." "Over and over, for years?" "I think so." Rachel closed the file very gently. "This is serious defamation, and in your case, we have more than accusations. We have dates, recordings, emails, metadata, a behavioral pattern, and long-term damages. That changes the whole game." The whole game. No one had ever used a phrase like that about my life before, but it was right. Because for the first time since everything started falling apart, I was no longer standing alone with a story that sounded too unbelievable for anyone else to accept. Now that story had timestamps, evidence, files, legal language sharp and cold enough to cut through every family performance. Rachel began legal action that same week. Victor Ellis was served on a Monday morning right at the front door of the house. Elaine Ellis received her papers in the grocery store parking lot between shopping carts that had not even been put away yet. I was not there to see either moment, but imagining it was enough to know the polished little world they had built was beginning to crack. And then the thing I did not have to do with my own hands finally happened on its own. The court file was public. People in town started reading it, not hearing about it secondhand, not watching my mother cry or my father lower his head at a microphone. Reading it, every page, every timeline, every call, every fake email traced back, every act of interference with my employment documented as part of an intentional pattern of harm. At the next town council meeting, my father stepped up to the podium again, wearing that same shirt, using that same voice, carrying that same carefully rehearsed pain. This time I was seated in the front row, and Rachel Turner sat beside me, one leg crossed over the other, a pen in her hand, looking nothing like someone about to join a performance. As soon as he finished the familiar opening of his speech, Rachel stood up. "My name is Rachel Turner, and I represent Maren Ellis," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear enough to reach every corner of the room. "All evidence relevant to this matter is now part of the public court record. Anyone interested is free to read it." Then she sat back down. That was all. No argument, no tears, no need for one more word. And in that very brevity, I felt something inside me come loose. Because for the first time, the truth did not need me to tell it in a shaking voice. It did not need me to beg anyone to believe me. It simply stood there, whole and visible, bright enough for anyone who wanted to see it. After that meeting, things did not reverse themselves in the dramatic way I used to imagine as a child, when I thought that one day the truth would walk into a room and everybody would instantly feel ashamed. In real life, it was much quieter than that. But that quiet was exactly what made it undeniable. My father did not hire another lawyer after the first one withdrew. He sent the court a handwritten response instead. Short, rigid, full of the language of a man who still believed fatherhood meant ownership. Rachel read it, set it down on the desk, and said, "He still does not understand that this case is no longer happening inside his kitchen." On the next hearing date, he failed to appear on time. Then, he never appeared at all. The court moved forward without him. When the default judgment was entered, I was sitting in Martin Cole's office. He printed a copy, placed it in front of me, then leaned his chair back to give me enough space to read. The legal phrases sat neatly on the white page. Defamation, unlawful interference with employment opportunities, damages awarded. I read all the way to the end and did not feel happy. I just felt as if a stone that had been resting on my chest for too long had finally been lifted, leaving behind an empty ache. The house I grew up in was eventually hit with a lien. In the end, my parents had to sell it to satisfy the judgment. I never drove down Maple Street to look at the for sale sign. I did not need to. Some endings do not require your eyes to witness them in order to believe they are real. My own beginning came in much smaller ways. I rented a one-bedroom apartment in Millfield on the ground floor, with a tiny kitchen and a window facing a narrow patch of grass out back. The day I got the key, I stood outside my own front door longer than most people probably would have, just feeling the very real weight of something so small resting in my palm. I bought a used car. I opened a bank account with only my name on it. And for the first time in my life, I looked at a balance without wondering who else might be able to reach into it. Martin Cole hired me as an administrative assistant after he saw me organize Sandra's and Rachel's files faster than anyone he had ever hired. No one gave me that job out of pity. They gave it to me because at last someone saw me as useful instead of someone who needed to be held back. Then, close to Thanksgiving, Elaine sent me a letter. No apology, no admission of guilt, just an invitation to come to dinner, as if 3 ruined years could be wrapped up with a turkey and a clean tablecloth. Rachel helped me send back only one message. Love does not include destroying your child's ability to survive. I used to think victory would sound like a door slamming shut, but it does not. It sounds like a quiet room, a dinner I cooked for myself, a key in my pocket, and the strange realization that I did not win my family back. I won back my right to be an independent human being. Wanting to leave is not betrayal. Wanting to live your own life is not cruelty. Sometimes it is simply survival. And if that door ever opens again one day, it will only open because I am the one who decides. Some things end, but your body does not fully believe it right away. Even now, there are evenings when I am standing alone in my little kitchen in Millfield, water gently boiling on the stove, the smell of garlic in the air, and I suddenly go still because I realize no one is about to walk in and ask what I am doing, where I am going, how much I spent, or why I think I have the right to make even a small decision like choosing my own dinner. Some freedoms are enormous precisely because they come from such small things. A ring of keys in your coat pocket. A bank account with only your name on it. A door you can lock at night without feeling guilty. I am not telling this story because I think I am the strongest person in the world. The truth is, there were parts of it when I was terrified. There were nights in the shelter when I stared up at the ceiling and wondered whether my parents had been right, whether maybe I really could not survive if I did not go back. When you have been controlled for too long, the hardest part is not walking out. The hardest part is learning how to stop hearing their voices inside your own head. To stop believing that wanting a life of your own is selfish. To stop thinking that pain is just the price you pay for family. And if you also grew up in a place where love always came tied to control, then I just want to say this as a woman who lost many years before finally understanding it. Some doors do not close to punish you. They close to save you. Some distances are not coldness. They are how the rest of you survives. I still do not know the answer to everything that happened. I only know my grandmother was right. Real love does not keep you inside a cage and call it safety. Real love leaves you a way out, a little dignity, and the right to choose for yourself where your life will go. If this story stayed with you, you can subscribe and stay with me for more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, or whether you've ever had to step away from people you loved in order to protect your peace.